So here it is. The question that I'm sure all of you have been invested in over the last few days. AssassinDave has gone back to Mobile Legends. HellsDevil, a paragon, a big voice in the community, has voiced his frustrations. And everybody is now clamoring to answer the question, is Wild Rift dying? There are two problems with that question. The first of which is it's a dumb question. The second of which is it's the wrong question. It's a dumb question because Wild Rift is in its first year of release. There are still regions that it hasn't even been released in. Riot probably hasn't secured their global strategy properly yet. And realistically, there is still plenty of room to grow. It is backed by the biggest gaming developer in the Western world, which that company is owned by the biggest gaming developer in the world. This has so much backing, and it has done relatively well. It has shown good first signs, although maybe not as much as they would have hoped. Wild Rift is clearly not dying. But the question, the second part of this, is it's the wrong question. What you should be asking is this. Yes, this is the question that you should be asking. Is Wild Rift growing? That's what we care about. In the early stages of the Wild Rift release, we want to know if it's growing. I'm going to talk about this in more detail, and I'm also going to address a lot of the issues that you may have seen in some of the other videos. But the very core essence of this can be solved with some of the data, and I can answer this question to an extent based on data available online. So let's take a look at that data now, and then we can answer the question and then talk about some key things that are important to Wild Rift in this marketplace. So this is a website called activeplayer.io. It is not 100% at estimating values, but it is a good way to compare the way it estimates the major players in the marketplace. Now this is the current estimated concurrent player base, 62,530, which is not a massive amount, but it is definitely a good starting place. And you can see at the bottom here, since release in October 2020, there was a little loss and then a gain, and it has been growing relatively steadily, although not rapidly, relatively steadily since release. Now, the reason that I want to compare it is that it is important to use the same data source for whenever you're comparing things. So let's have a look at Mobile Legends Bang Bang. 3 times the active concurrent player base with constant growth. And what you do need to know about this growth down here is that, I don't know if I showed you the original one properly over here. What you do need to know about this growth here, you can see that the growth has been relatively steady. And it continues to be relatively steady. What you need to know about Mobile Legends and this data time frame is it's obviously over a 2-year period and not over just the few months period that's over on the Wild Rift version. And it has seen peaks and troughs, but it has continued to grow at a relatively steady pace. If we compare that to Arena of Valor, a similar number, but less numbers of concurrents than Wild Rift. And this is over another 2-year period where it was in a similar place. In the first year of release, Arena of Valor was at a similar place. You notice that this is 10 million here. Wild Rift is just a little bit below that right now. If we go back over to the Wild Rift page, you'll see Wild Rift is now working its way up to 8 million, which you can see up here. Just count the zeros. I got a bit confused with the zeros in the first time I did this, but 8 million, right? So if you look at Arena of Valor, it was in its first year of release, working its way up to 10 million average monthly players. So Wild Rift is following a similar trajectory. You look over at Mobile Legends, obviously Mobile Legends has been out for way longer, so I can't go back far enough data, but there are similar growth curves for all of these games. So there's probably no need to panic at this current moment in time. Wild Rift continues to post relatively good increases in average monthly users, and it is growing at a steady pace according to this particular website. Now, the accuracy of this website can definitely be debated, but for the moment that is irrelevant. We're just using this as a way to compare all of the different games that are in the same category as Wild Rift. So what is the Wild Rift strategy? Because you'll notice that some people have talked about Riot relying on their brand power to accelerate Wild Rift, relying on the fact that they are the original to sell the game. Why would you play the copies when you can play the original? Which I think is a relatively strong brand pull when you're appealing to new players. But therein lies the problem. That is appealing to new players. Wild Rift right now is probably trying to capture new players, either converts from their PC version, like myself, who doesn't really have time to play long PC games anymore, or new mobile players in total. This strategy is not good enough to capture the existing market. It is not good enough to take players away from Mobile Legends and Arena of Valor. And do you know why? And it's one of the things that I think Riot knows best. So to think that they don't know best about this is probably stupid. But it is the free-to-play conundrum. When you have first mover advantage, when we talk about marketing, we talk about something called first mover advantage and follower advantage. First mover advantage gets you to the market first, but it gives you less room to get things wrong. Because if you get things wrong and then a follower advantage occurs, they can look at what you did, reiterate, and make a new product that's better. But that follower advantage doesn't really work as well in live service games, because you can update live service games as you go. The product that you release isn't the product that's going to exist for the remainder of its lifetime. So when Mobile Legends was a first mover into the mobile MOBA market, they gained an immediate advantage that wasn't made up by having a follower advantage anywhere else. You get minimal follower advantage by following Mobile Legends, because if they see you do something, they can just update the game and copy it, which is what they do fairly frequently. Mobile Legends is very good at emulating and making things better based on what they're seeing from the competition. So Mobile Legends has an inherent advantage in the market. They're a first mover. They were first to market, the first game that was copying League of Legends on a mobile platform, and that was almost 5 years ago. Arena of Valor was second, and actually Wild Rift is very late to the game. And just because they're the original doesn't mean that they're going to naturally draw players, because of the free-to-play conundrum. When you have a player that has sat playing Mobile Legends for 4 to 5 years, and they've invested 5 years of time and 5 years of microtransactions, they are not going to give that up just because you are the original. You are Riot Games. All of their friends play it. They've invested all that time. That is why, and League of Legends knows this. Riot knows this. This is how PC League of Legends has remained the dominant game on the market. No one wants to give it up because the amount of time and resources and effort they've put into that game. And it's the same with Mobile Legends and to a limited extent, AOV. But Mobile Legends has that inherent advantage because they were a first mover and they've captured the audience. And now the audience doesn't want to leave. And Riot are not offering a unique or a unique enough value proposition to make people leave. I think the only way you get people to leave Mobile Legends is if you say, link us your Mobile Legends account and we'll give you a decent, input of cosmetics and whatever. But that's never going to happen, right? Clearly. But that is why it's so difficult to capture the Mobile Legends audience, because they have first movers advantage, they have communities built there, they have their friends that play it, etc., etc. That is why we're not seeing explosive growth, because explosive growth would have been if we just captured the whole market instantly. And the people that were playing Mobile Legends and AOV were just like, fuck these games, let's go play Wild Rift. But that's not going to happen. The Riot brand strength is not big enough to ditch 4 years of playing Mobile Legends or whatever you've got for anybody that's invested. And also, you're in a category, a MOBA category, that is extremely hard to get new players into. When I was growing up, everybody played MOBAs, and it was a natural transition into League of Legends because it was the in-game. Now, MOBAs, they're not dying out, but they're not as popular. And getting new players into MOBA is harder and harder because you need to understand every lane. You need to understand a massive roster of champions. You need to understand CSing, towers, pressure, how to play, mechanic. It's such a complex genre to get into that it is very difficult, realistically, to capture a new player base. And that's why a good tutorial system is extremely important to getting new players onboarded. But also, something that HellsDevil and I think AssassinDave also mentioned, having strong communities. One of the biggest pulls to get players into MOBAs is having friends teach you how to play MOBAs. So you need to facilitate community growth through social features in game. And that brings me on to what Wild Rift is currently missing. The first thing that you need to be aware of is when you listen to content creators and pros, they represent the absolute top percentage of players. The issues that they face are likely the issues that are not going to plague the rest of the community. So things like VPN usage, things like Wintrading, those are actually issues that seem very big, but actually affect a minority of games. However, the severity of those issues are amplified because the people at the top end of the ladders often have the biggest voices. Not to say that these issues shouldn't be fixed, and I think the win trading issue, I have absolutely no excuses for why Wild Rift are not quick to act. There is literally an account on the top of the European servers that literally is advertising boosting services. And the 2 players above that clearly have the most ridiculous win rates on champions that just shouldn't even be physically possible over the number of games that they've played. So, I mean, I feel like there is no excuse for banning these players. The Vainglory had problems banning high elo players because they didn't want to affect the high elo player base. They were worried that if they banned high elo players, queue times would go up. There would not be enough players to facilitate a high elo player base at a healthy level. So that was one of the major problems that Vainglory had as developers. They were just very, very slow to act when it came to dealing with high elo players and trolling. But Wild Rift shouldn't really have that issue. There is a lot of players in Challenger, there's a lot of players in Grandmaster, and yes, there are queue time issues, but you would probably expect that when it came to the very top end of the market, or at the very top end of the player base anyway. But you need to remember that when it comes to VPN issues, win trading, and extreme levels of repetitive trolling, that is usually issues that affect high elo players where they queue into the same players, and they are affected more heavily by match fixing or match influencing situations, because that is just the core crux of it. It affects your elite players most of the time, but your elite players often have the largest voices in the community, and therefore those issues are often amplified. However, there are issues that affect the whole player base, such as trolling and behavioral issues, which are consistent across elos, and those are things that definitely should be fixed. And I think there is no excuse for Wild Rift to act on those things slowly. The only reason that I can give for slow acting on these particular issues is collection of data, and the need to have a very secure amount of data to make these kind of decisions, especially when it comes to eliminating players from your game. However, in my eyes, there should be a very clear threshold for behavior set. And as HellsDevil correctly said, these are types of issues that will cause players to leave your game. And the problem is, if you don't cater and deal with issues that high elo players and the elite players are complaining about, they will amplify those issues through their reaches. And therefore, it will make new players or players at lower levels feel like these issues are bigger than they actually are, which is definitely the case when it comes to some of the issues that you're seeing talked about regularly from these content creators and these high elo players. And that, in turn, will have the effect that HellsDevil said of causing players to leave the game. And it would cause players to leave the game specifically because, they are being told that these issues are bigger than they actually are. But that is enough to cause problems when it comes to sort of new players and players that are kind of heavily invested in sort of high-low personalities and elite players. So that is an important part of what Wild Rift is doing wrong. All of the issues raised by AssassinDave and HellsDevil are correct, and they exist, and they are important. But I think they are amplified beyond points where you would, they are made to seem bigger than they are, is the best way to say it. And not because they're small issues. These are issues that commonly affect the high elo players, and they happen regularly. So the high elo players will obviously have a very negative experience. But they are amplified to a wider player base through their voices, where they may not be issues that affect players at every level. I'm sure that players in Gold do not experience legitimate win trading at anywhere near the level that players in Challenger and Grandmaster do. That is just a straight fact. Mainly due to the population size, how difficult it would be to consistently matchmake into win traders. It's just implausible that you would see that same level of problem at elos that are below the very top echelons. But those are important issues that we need to be aware of, and they are things that should be fixed, mainly because you want to help facilitate and appease your content creators, because they are voices and ambassadors for your game. And that brings me on to another point: content creation partnerships. If you don't know, there is one system. Oops, I've paused the game. There is one system that Riot uses to work with content creators for Wild Rift, and that system is called the League Partner Program, and is not exclusive to Wild Rift. It is a Riot program for the majority of their products. it is a very, very good program for League of Legends. Maybe a great program for Valorant. Maybe a great program for Legends of Runeterra. But it is garbage for Wild Rift. You do get some benefits. We get free wild cores on a monthly basis, 5,500, which is great, clearly. I love that. It really helps with my giveaways. And we get early access to patch notes, which helps me create a good patch notes video. But that's it. Those are really the only benefits that you get. And I think the problem is that it feels, especially when it comes to attention and the ways that we work together with Riot, it feels like we're the bastard child of the LPP. I don't feel like the LPP is fit for purpose. Mobile content creation communities are very different to PC content creation communities. Brawl Stars and Supercell, etc., have a brilliant example of how to facilitate and help the growth of content creators in their space, including creator codes and helping facilitate growth through partnering up in client and helping to boost viewership and signal boost content creators as much as physically possible. Riot doesn't really do that with Wild Rift because the Wild Rift on the LPP is a very low priority compared to a lot of the other games for Riot that are already very well established. And I think Riot haven't learned lessons from other content creation platforms and other content creation strategies in the space because it's just not something that I think they've had the time to invest in right now. And that's not a problem, but it is lessons that they should be learning. And there are also really important social lessons to learn when it comes to Wild Rift as well. Things like AOV and Mobile Legends do really well is they have global chats, they have communities, they have things like guilds and teams, and they have great ways of creating communities. They have Facebook integrations, they have social integrations, they have stream and YouTube embedded in their clients to facilitate esports growth, facilitate content creation growth. They have loads of great ways to help bolster and facilitate communities, and Wild Rift doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have global chat, it doesn't have teams or guilds. It doesn't have a way to foster and build communities within the client space. And that is a problem, and that will prove to be a problem. Communities are the best way to get new players into your game. Having communities teach and provide a safe space for new players to play is a key way to generate new players in your game and help bolster the tutorial experience that already exists within the platform. And those are things that I think Wild Rift desperately needs in order to be good. But I also do want to see them find better ways to work with content creators. And I don't have all the answers for that, by the way. But I know that it will be a good start to learn lessons from the likes of Supercell, to learn lessons from the likes of Mobile Legends, and find ways to help facilitate and bolster the strength of your content creators that currently exist on your platform. It does feel like their marketing strategy, especially with, as AssassinDave was saying, we're going to work with content creators in the League of Legends space, but we are going to ignore organic Wild Rift content creators. And from a marketing perspective, that makes sense. Organic Wild Rift content creators already have a captured audience. But you should try to help foster your organic content creators, because they are the ones that keep people engaged, and they are the ones that help retain players. Other outside influencers are great for trying to get people to test the game, but your organic content creators are the ones that are going to get people to stay. And that's why I think it's important to spend time with them to figure out what they need in order to succeed. Another thing that I've noticed, and especially when it comes to my video views, and video views are a good way to assess current interest in a game. Content cycles right now feel quite slow. The double release of a champion, rather than a trickle of champions, means that you have long periods of stale content, and stale content is not exciting for anybody. So I really would love, even with Senna and Lucian, I know it's great to release them together, but I just feel like the content cycle could be sped up a little bit. It's probably not possible to do that now, but I do feel like content should be released. And when it comes to communication, I think Riot have been pretty good. However, I think there are issues that, that I think they could be more vocal about. There is clearly Wintrading issues again, and when you look back at the communication, they were like, oh, we will deal with this swiftly. We don't stand for Wintrading. That communication hasn't held because obviously there has been Wintrading issues that have not been fixed and have not been solved. So if you've given that impression to a community and then you don't follow up on it, you need to say why, or you need to explain that you are doing it. You may just not be seeing it directly. But sometimes just being open and direct helps alleviate a player base and helps just tell them, because at the end of the day, you may say, well, what's the point of putting this communication out? Most of our players won't read it, but then the players that do read it will care. And if the players that don't read it, if some players don't read it, then what's the point? You know, they won't know if you're going to put it out or not. So I think when you put out communication that sets a precedent, if that precedent is not being met, then you need to either say why, or you need to say it is being met, but we're just not shouting about it, or you may not be seeing the direct results or effects. It's important to tread the line. You don't want to patronize your player base, but you should inform them. And I think there are some examples of companies that do really strong, consistent communication, where they have like informal dev diaries on a bi-weekly basis sometimes, and those things can really help create engagement with your community. And I don't know whether that's within Riot's remit. Maybe they don't quite have the resources to be able to do that. And you might laugh and say Riot Games resources, yeah, but you have to realize that the Wild Rift team is a subset of Riot Games, and they will not interact with the rest of the Riot Games. They cannot just pull someone from the League of Legends team or the Valorant team and say, hey, come and help us with this. They have their own team and they will hire for their own team. Another question that get asked is, why are they not released in India? Well, if you've seen recently, they've actually been advertising for someone who help the rollout in that region, or in that that overall region specifically. So I think it's very likely that India is on their list. But you do have to remember that there are certain external influences outside of Riot's control that are probably delaying things like India. For instance, if those of you have followed any kind of news with India and apps recently, you'll know that the Indian government is banning apps. They banned PUBG Mobile. They banned TikTok. Or I think they were planning on banning TikTok. There are clearly regulatory issues that Riot Games need to push through in order to have Wild Rift not banned when it gets released. And that, I think, that is likely what is holding up the Riot Games Wild India release. It's probably nothing to do with Riot Games wanting to release it in India. I know that they delayed North America, not that they wanted to, but because of certain issues that were causing them. So there was infrastructure issues in North America that meant that they had to delay the release. It could be very likely that we have infrastructure issues in India. It could be likely government regulatory body issues. But I can tell you it's certainly not Riot wanting to delay the release on purpose. There will be an issue that is causing them to delay release in India. And that is obviously not good for the Indian population, who I know is super excited about Wild Rift. And I think it's a very core market for Riot Games to capture, because you have a huge audience base there. But there is clearly an issue that is not allowing Riot to release there. And I can tell you it's not Riot's own laziness, because they clearly want Riot out in India. It's such a huge market for them. Why would they not? I think the core takeaway that you need to have from this video is why Riot Games is not complacent and they don't want Wild Rift to fail. Who the would want that? You've just invested millions and millions of dollars into developing what could potentially be your biggest game on the market. They clearly are not being complacent or wanting it to fail. And I think it's very easy to not look at that perspective. The only reason I'm able to talk like this is because I've been doing an MBA for the last nearly 1.5 years now, and I have learned about how businesses operate, and I can apply that to Riot's thinking. Riot haven't told me any of this. I'm making assumptions based on my knowledge, but it's assumptions that I think are sound because of the way I know that companies operate through my learnings. So yes, there are clearly lots of issues with Wild Rift right now. There are issues with high elo player base problems like VPNs, Wintrading, trolling. There is issues with behavior issues across the board. There are content creator partnership issues that I think have been problematic. Balancing issues people have talked about, but honestly, MOBAs are never perfectly balanced, and actually I think Wild Rift is relatively balanced. That might be a unpopular opinion. Clearly there have been broken champions from time to time that have heavily influenced the meta. Garen. But I think Wild Rift in general is pretty balanced, and don't crucify me for saying that, because I do genuinely believe it. India, we've obviously talked about. I've not been playing the video. I've not been playing the video for ages. I'm sorry, guys. I'm useless. But regardless, we're here for what I'm saying, not for what's on screen. I think that the big takeaway that you should have from this video is Wild Rift's not dying. Wild Rift is growing, but relatively slowly. But that is, as for what we've discussed back in the earlier sections, for obvious reasons. Yes, there are issues with Wild Rift. There are major issues with Wild Rift that definitely need addressing. But they are not issues that Riot don't want to solve. Neither are they issues that can't be solved. And I assume down the line they will be. And I also don't think if they don't get solved tomorrow, it's not going to suddenly kill the game. However, these are issues that I think are clearly affecting your vocal ambassadors, and that is a problem. And that is something that should be addressed. You should do more to help facilitate your ambassadors. But other than that, I think Riot are doing relatively well. And I think investing into esports sounds like a dumb idea, but I actually think it's a good way to capture certain parts of the market, like the AOV market, where there were a lot of competitive players that were interested in competition, and just AOV weren't providing that for them. So there are obviously a subset of players that are interested in esports and interested in competition, and that's what they're trying to do. I think the big problem is you just don't want to see them. You don't want to see them over-invest in this particular area. Vainglory did. They used it as a pure marketing strategy, and it didn't work. Riot have got a lot of money. I don't expect them to blow money that will put them in bankruptcy like it did with Vainglory. I mean, Vainglory didn't go bankrupt, but essentially. But obviously, you know, it's important that they don't overspend on esports, because it, as you can see from the numbers, it's not exactly reaching a massive audience. But it is a good way to encourage and retain veteran players, which has always been one of the key elements of esports, and that's been one of the key areas of the way that League of Legends has succeeded in the long term. They have retained a lot of veteran players through their esports programs. But yes, I hope you guys have enjoyed the discussion. I think I've had a relatively comprehensive look at how Wild Rift is approaching some of these issues, and maybe given you a more balanced viewpoint from what I believe is, you know, what I believe are core Riot principles in terms of the way that they're approaching the Wild Rift strategy. You know, I think at the end of the day, they may eventually open up their marketing to try and attract Mobile Legends players, but they have to have a value proposition that is good enough to stop Mobile Legends players playing a game that they've played for maybe over 4 years at a time. And that is difficult to do, and I don't expect it to be done quickly. So don't worry about Wild Rift. It's still growing relatively healthily, although not extremely quickly. But I never expected it to grow quickly, because there is a limited market, and you clearly can't capture it all because of the issues that we've talked about. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you soon.